Welcome back to the deep dive. Ready to get into it today. We're taking a closer look at larceny fraud.
Ooh, larceny fraud.
Yeah, we've got a whole stack of research and news articles here ready to go.
This is going to be
But,
about it.
you might think stealing is as simple as just taking something
Right.
that doesn't belong to you, but larceny fraud, it's not that simple. It adds a whole nother layer to it.
It does.
It's not just taking stuff. It's about using tricks. It's about deception to get what you want.
It's really interesting. It's unnerving, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're not talking about some petty thief, swiping a candy bar from the store.
Right.
This is manipulation,
Yeah.
lies, sometimes really big lies.
Yeah, sometimes on a grand scale.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, have you ever fallen for one of these tricks?
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. Let's look at some examples, starting with embezzlement.
Okay.
So picture this. You're running a business. You've got this employee.
Right.
They've been with you for years, super trustworthy.
Seems trustworthy.
You think everything's going great, then bam.
Yeah.
You find out they've been taking money from the company,
Yeah.
maybe cooking the books to hide it all.
That's a classic betrayal of trust, and it can be devastating,
Oh, yeah.
especially for smaller businesses.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the thing is, it's not always about a huge amount of money disappearing at once.
Right.
Sometimes it's this slow, little by little,
Right.
taking little amounts over time makes it even harder to detect.
Yeah, it's like that saying, death by 1,000 cuts.
Exactly.
But financially, right.
Yes, exactly.
And then think about shoplifting. I mean, we've all seen this, right?
Of course.
At a store, someone slipping something in their bag or pocket.
Yeah.
But the legal side of it is really interesting. The definition hinges on the intent to permanently deprive the store of that item.
Right. So it's not just about forgetting to pay for something.
Exactly.
It has to be that conscious decision to steal.
Yeah, so that's really what's key there, that intent. And this issue's gotten really complex, too, with this rise of organized retail crime.
It has, yeah.
Now it's not just individuals stealing for themselves.
Yeah.
It's like coordinated groups.
Yeah, and they're reselling it for a profit.
Yeah, it's crazy. So we've talked about physical objects, but imagine someone stealing something a little less tangible, like the ownership of your home.
Right.
So that's where fraudulent land transfers or property transfers come in.
Yeah, it sounds kind of crazy.
It does.
Like out of a movie,
Yeah,
but it happens.
it does.
More than you think.
More than you think.
Like they forge documents, make it look like they own your property.
Oh, wow.
Then they can transfer it to themselves or sell it to someone else who has no idea.
Oh my gosh, that's terrifying. It's terrifying to think about something like the deed to your house
Right.
could be manipulated like that.
Yeah.
And then you've got the whole digital world of checks, identity theft, wire fraud.
Yeah, it's so easy to move money around these days.
It is.
But so easy to exploit that.
It is.
Think about those phishing emails you get all the time.
Yeah.
That's wire fraud.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to get your bank information or get you to send money to a fake account.
I get those all the time.
Yeah.
It's scary. It makes you realize you have to be really careful online.
Yes, you do.
About what you click on and what information you share. But what about those too good to be true investment opportunities?
Well, yeah.
That's where theft by false pretenses comes in, right?
Exactly.
So these schemes, they prey on people who want to make money fast.
Right, and they trust these supposed experts.
Yeah, and then you've got Ponzi schemes.
The classic.
Yeah, they entice investors with promises of these crazy high returns, but they're really just using money from new investors to pay off the old ones.
Yeah, and keeping a lot for themselves.
Of course. The Bernie Madoff case comes to mind.
Oh, huge example.
It's crazy how he fooled so many people for so long.
It is.
Like, he built this image of success.
Yeah.
Legitimacy.
It's fascinating. He was so successful,
He was.
partly because of the psychology of the victims.
Oh, interesting.
He targeted wealthy individuals and charities
Really?
who would believe they were getting access to these exclusive investments.
Wow. That's really interesting.
He played on their status and desire to be in this exclusive group.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a reminder that really anyone can fall victim to these schemes no matter how smart they think they are.
Absolutely.
Or how financially savvy they are. So we've talked about different types of larceny fraud.
We have.
But what are some common schemes people should really watch out for in everyday life?
So those fake investment schemes we talked about,
Yeah.
those are a big one, and they're getting more and more sophisticated.
Oh, really?
Using social media and all these online platforms to reach so many people.
Oh, wow.
They make these convincing websites
Really?
and marketing stuff to make it look legit.
Oh, gosh, that's scary. And what about credit card fraud? It feels like we hear about data breaches and stolen credit card information constantly.
All the time.
Yeah.
Data breaches are huge. They give criminals access to tons of information.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they sell it on the dark web to make fake cards or make purchases.
Wow. And it's not just online either, right?
Nope. They can use skimmers on ATMs
Oh, yeah.
or at those point-of-sale terminals to get your info.
So even those everyday transactions can be risky.
Totally.
Gosh, what can we even do to protect ourselves?
Well, you don't need to stop using credit cards.
Okay, good.
But be vigilant.
Okay.
Check your statements all the time.
Oh.
For anything that looks suspicious, even small transactions, report it right away to your bank.
Okay.
And you can use a credit monitoring service.
Okay, that's good advice. What about all these security measures businesses are taking now, though?
Yeah.
Chip readers, PNs.
Yeah, they're getting stricter.
Yeah.
It does make it harder.
Yeah, okay.
But criminals are always finding new ways.
Always, right?
And sometimes it creates this environment of distrust within the company.
How so?
Like if employees feel like they're being watched or questioned all the time.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so we've talked about fake investments, credit card fraud. What about insurance fraud?
Oh, yeah, that's another big one.
What is it exactly?
A lot of times it's people inflating claims or staging accidents to get money from insurance companies.
Oh, so like faking a slip and fall at a store
Exactly.
to get money for a fake injury?
Or saying their stolen jewelry was worth way more
Wow.
than it was.
And people think it's a victimless crime, but it's not.
It's not.
Because ultimately, it drives up insurance costs for everyone.
For everyone.
Okay, now let's talk about employee theft. So we talked about embezzlement earlier.
Right.
Someone in a position of trust stealing.
Yeah.
What about smaller things?
Yeah.
Like repeated offenses. Like what if an employee borrows a few dollars from petty cash and doesn't pay it back?
That happens.
Yeah.
And it can really add up over time.
Yeah. That makes sense. It's those small actions that fly under the radar.
Right. It's those little increments.
So how can businesses prevent this? Should they just get rid of petty cash?
You could, but it's more about the culture.
Okay.
Making sure employees understand the policies,
Okay.
the importance of ethical behavior, and having clear procedures for handling money.
Procedures, yeah.
And making sure they're followed.
Right, so it's like a system of checks and balances to make sure things don't go unnoticed.
Right. And encourage employees to speak up if they see something fishy.
That's a good idea. Now, finally, let's talk about intellectual property theft.
Okay.
This one feels a little more complex. What is it?
So it's stealing things like software, patents, trade secrets, that kind of thing.
Okay.
It can be really bad for businesses,
Yeah.
especially in tech or pharmaceuticals,
Yeah.
where innovation is key.
Right, because that's like their whole business.
Exactly.
So like if a disgruntled employee steals company files and uses them to start their own competing business,
That's exactly.
or sells the information to a competitor.
Yep. That's it.
And it's gotten easier with remote work and cloud computing.
So much easier.
Yeah, because the information is just out there.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that we need to be careful about who has access to sensitive information,
Totally.
both personally and professionally.
Absolutely. And you know what? This leads perfectly into our next topic.
Oh, does it? What's that?
How to spot the signs of larceny fraud.
Oh, this is good because now we've seen all the ways it can happen.
Exactly.
You need to know what to look for.
Yeah.
We need to be able to recognize those red flags.
Absolutely.
So let's dive into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Welcome back.
Now that we know all the ways larceny fraud can happen,
Right.
let's look at some real-world examples.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, like those hypothetical scenarios, they don't really hit home.
They don't.
So let's start with those too good to be true investment opportunities.
Okay.
The Bernie Madoff case is a prime example, right?
Oh, absolutely. Madoff, he was a master manipulator.
Yeah, he was.
He created this air of exclusivity, made his investments seem like so sought after,
Yeah.
like a secret club that only a few people could join.
Oh, interesting. And he targeted wealthy people specifically, didn't he?
He did. Wealthy individuals, charitable organizations.
Really?
Yeah, and that was a big part of his success.
Why is that?
Well, those people might have been more likely to believe they were getting access to these exclusive high-return investments.
That makes sense, yeah.
He played on their status and their desire to be part of something exclusive.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's like anyone can fall victim to these schemes no matter how smart you are.
Absolutely.
Or financially savvy you think you are.
Yeah.
So how can we avoid falling for these scams? Should we be suspicious of any investment that comes our way?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
But you have to be skeptical
Okay.
of anything that promises really high returns with no risk.
Okay, that makes sense.
Do your research.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask tough questions.
Yeah.
And if something feels wrong, just trust your gut.
Trust your gut, yeah. And don't be afraid to walk away
Exactly.
if it seems too good to be true.
It probably is.
It probably is. Now, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about credit card fraud.
Oh, yeah?
It feels like it's just become a part of life now.
It has.
We hear about data breaches all the time.
All the time.
It makes you wonder how you can even shop online safely anymore.
I know. Think about all those times you've swiped your card
Right.
at a gas station, at a restaurant.
Yeah.
Did you ever think someone might have tampered with the card reader?
Honestly, I haven't.
Yeah.
But now I am.
Criminals can put skimmers on ATMs
Right?
or those point-of-sale terminals to steal your information.
Oh, wow.
And then there are data breaches all the time where hackers steal information from companies.
So even those, like, safe everyday transactions
Yeah.
can be risky.
Yeah, what can we do to protect ourselves?
Yeah, what can we do?
Be proactive. Check your statements all the time, even the small transactions.
Okay.
If anything seems weird, report it to your bank right away
Okay.
and consider a credit monitoring service.
Okay, good advice. Businesses are implementing more security measures now too, right?
They are.
Like chip readers and pinnies.
Yeah, they're getting stricter, which is good.
Yeah.
It makes it harder.
Okay.
But criminals are resourceful. They're always finding new ways.
Always, right. It's a constant battle.
It is. It's an arms race.
Yeah, it is. And sometimes those security measures can create distrust in the company, right?
They can.
How so?
Well, if employees feel like they're constantly being monitored
Oh, yeah.
or questioned.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a tough balance
Yeah.
between security and a positive work environment.
Yeah. Speaking of workplaces, what about insurance fraud?
Insurance fraud, yeah. I feel like we hear about that a lot.
All the time. You know the stories you hear about people faking slip and falls
Uh-huh.
or exaggerating their injuries from a car accident?
Oh.
That's insurance fraud.
So it's not just about exaggerating existing damages, it's about creating a whole fake scenario.
Exactly.
Wow.
And it's a crime that hurts everyone.
Yeah,
Insurance companies have to pay, and they pass those costs on to everyone else in higher premiums.
that's a good point. Okay, let's shift to employee theft. Earlier, we talked about embezzlement, where someone's in a position of trust and they steal.
Right.
But what about smaller things, those repeated small offenses?
Those happen all the time.
Yeah.
Like an employee borrowing money from petty cash and not paying it back.
Right, right.
That can add up to a lot of money over time.
Yeah, it's those small actions
Mm-hmm.
that go unnoticed.
Right. Little by little.
So how can businesses prevent this? Should they just get rid of petty cash?
You could, but it's really about the culture of the company.
Okay.
Making sure employees understand the policies, the importance of ethical behavior,
Right.
having clear procedures for handling cash,
Yeah.
and making sure those procedures are followed.
So it's like checks and balances again.
Yeah,
To
exactly.
make sure things don't slip through the cracks.
Right.
Yeah.
And encourage employees to report anything suspicious.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Now, let's talk about intellectual property theft.
Okay.
Can you give us an example of how this plays out in the real world?
Sure. Imagine a tech startup.
Okay.
They've developed a new software.
Okay.
They've spent years working on it.
Uh-huh.
It's about to change their industry.
Yeah.
But then a competitor steals their source code.
Oh.
Maybe they bribed a disgruntled employee.
Oh.
Now they can copy the product.
So they're stealing all their hard work.
Exactly. They're stealing their innovation.
Wow.
The competitor can sell it for cheaper
Yeah.
and put the startup out of business.
That's awful.
It's a nightmare for any company that relies on its intellectual property.
It is. It really highlights how important it is
Yeah.
to protect those trade secrets and intellectual property.
Yeah. Be vigilant about cybersecurity,
Yeah.
employee agreements,
Yeah.
things like
Yeah.
that.
Good advice. So we've seen how larceny fraud can happen in all these different ways, from those investment schemes to smaller things like employee theft.
Right.
It's clearly a complex issue
Very complex.
with serious consequences.
It is.
And it's a reminder that we need to be informed and proactive
You do.
to protect ourselves.
Absolutely.
But what about the legal side of things?
Yeah.
What laws are out there to protect victims
Right.
and punish the offenders? Let's dive into that in the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to the deep dive.
Okay.
We've talked about all the different types of larceny fraud, seen how they happen in real life.
Right.
We even talked about those red flags, how to spot them.
Yeah.
Now let's get into the legal side of things. What laws are in place to deal with all of this?
So larceny fraud is a criminal offense.
Okay.
Each state, each jurisdiction will have its own specific laws.
Okay.
But they generally outline the crime itself,
Uh-huh.
how serious it is, whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony, and the potential penalties.
Yeah.
So there's no one law that covers every single type of larceny fraud.
Right. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Okay,
The legal system needs to be flexible to deal with all the different schemes.
that makes sense.
We've been talking about everything from shoplifting to complex financial schemes.
Yeah, like the Madoff case.
Exactly. They need different approaches.
That makes sense. It's like trying to fit square pegs into round holes.
Exactly.
If you try to use the same law for everything. And this is a field that's constantly evolving, right?
Absolutely.
As technology changes, new types of fraud will pop up.
All the time. It's a constant game of catch-up
Yeah.
for lawmakers and law enforcement.
Yeah, trying to stay ahead of the criminals.
Exactly. They're always coming up with new tricks. But even with those specific laws,
Yeah.
there's a lot of interpretation
Oh, interesting.
when it comes to actually applying them to real cases.
So you're saying it's not always black and white.
Right. There's a lot of gray area.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's talk about enforcement. Who investigates these crimes and what's that process like?
Well, it depends
Okay.
on the scale and complexity.
Okay.
Smaller offenses, like shoplifting, are usually handled by local police.
Okay.
But for those bigger financial schemes
Yeah.
or cases that cross state lines, you'll see federal agencies getting involved.
So like the FBI or the Secret Service.
Exactly.
I bet those investigations can get pretty complicated.
They can, especially with wire fraud or identity theft, where you have that digital trail to follow.
Yeah, it's all online.
It is. Investigators have to go through tons of financial records,
Wow.
interview a lot of witnesses,
Uh-huh.
work with cybersecurity experts to try and unravel it all.
Gosh, sounds like a real-life detective story.
It really is. It takes a lot of skill and expertise to figure it all out.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say the investigation's done and they have enough evidence. What's next?
Usually the case goes to a prosecutor.
Okay.
They review everything
Uh-huh.
and decide whether to file charges.
Okay, and if they do?
If the accused pleads not guilty,
Yeah.
then it goes to trial.
Oh, wow.
The prosecution has to present their case and prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed the crime.
I bet those trials are intense,
They can be.
especially with all that technical evidence they have to present.
Right. There's a lot at stake, not just for the defendant,
Yeah,
but also for the victims who are seeking justice.
that's a good point. Speaking of victims, what's their role in all of this?
Their role is crucial.
Okay.
Their testimonies about how they were defrauded, the impact it had on their lives, those are incredibly powerful.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It really brings home the fact that these aren't just names on a file. They're real people who have been hurt.
Yeah, and I imagine it can be empowering for them
It can be.
to be able to confront the person who did this to them.
It's a chance to reclaim some control.
Yeah, to get justice.
Exactly.
So we've talked about the laws, the investigations, the trials.
We have.
But is the system actually working? Is it effectively combating larceny fraud?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer.
I bet.
Law enforcement is working hard to keep up with these evolving threats, but it's a persistent problem.
Yeah, it feels like a constant battle.
It is. It's a cat and mouse game.
So where does that leave us? What can we do?
It all comes down to knowledge.
Okay.
The more we understand these different types of fraud, the warning signs,
That's fair.
the potential consequences,
Yeah.
the better equipped we are to protect ourselves.
That's a good point. It's not just about relying on law enforcement.
Right.
It's about taking responsibility for our own security.
Exactly. Be informed. Be cautious.
Be proactive.
Yes, exactly. Don't just assume it won't happen to you.
That's a great takeaway. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah.
From how these crimes work to the legal and ethical ramifications.
It's been a fascinating discussion.
It has. I hope our listener feels empowered to take steps to protect themselves.
Me too.
One final thought to leave you with.
Okay. We've focused a lot on the financial and legal consequences of larceny fraud.
Right.
But let's not forget the human cost.
That's so important.
These crimes have a devastating impact
Yeah.
on individuals, families, businesses.
They do.
They erode trust,
Uh-huh.
cause financial hardship,
Yeah.
leave emotional scars. So as you go about your day, think about your choices, even the small ones.
Right.
Are you acting with honesty and integrity?
Good question.
Because ultimately, building a world where this happens less
Right.
starts with each of us.
It does.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.